everyone. Well, it is quite an honor to be back in my hometown of Cranston, Rhode Island. To welcome the First Lady of the United States, Dr. Jill Biden. Just the doctor's information, this area of Cranston was known as Knightsville. And it was settled from many immigrants from Outrage, Italy. Dr. Biden knows all about that because her grandfather immigrated from Italy. Not Outrage, but close enough. So you're right at home. You're right at home. I also want to salute Jim Landry, the Congressman. Jim has done an extraordinary job, and obviously we have to keep that effort, that intellect, that integrity in the United States Congress, and that's why we're here for Seth Magazine tonight. Now I want to brag a little bit about what we did under President Joe Biden. We were able to take on Big Pharma for the first time and reduce the price of medicines for seniors. We capped the price of insulin, for example, at $35 a month. Insulin was invented in 1920. The inventors sold the patent rights for $1, and some companies are charging $400 a month or more. Outrage. They can't do that anymore. And what is one of the greatest threats to our society, our national security, our economy, and by the way, the future generations, these youngsters that are here? Climate change. Climate change. And what did we do? We went ahead and passed significant legislation for the first time, fighting back the oil and fossil fuel companies to provide incentives for alternate energy, wind energy, solar energy, electric vehicles. Oh, by the way, we're on a track to be able to turn around and say to our friend Vladimir Putin where he can put his oil. When the president took over, our unemployment rate was 6.7%. It's 3% nationally, and it's 2+% here in Rhode Island. Jobs, 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 jobs. So here's the problem. I'm not getting anywhere. If we elect a Republican, Alan Fung, all of that is wrong. I've been down there for a while. I had the privilege of representing the 2nd District for 6 years and the United States Senate for a few years longer. I've seen them work before. They're going to use threats to shut down the government and say, repeal the Medicare pharmaceutical reduction. Take rid of those, because the pharma companies want it. You're going to take out those incentives for alternate energy, because the big oil and gas companies don't like it. Who do you think is paying for all these advertisements flooding the airways? It is big pharma, it is big oil, and it's just big rich people who want to tax them. That's what the Republicans do. We have to hold this seat. It's not just about an individual candidacy, it's about the future of our country, really. Now, just let me set the stage with one more fact. There are about 174 election deniers who are running for the House of Representatives. My number might be up or down a little bit, but it's close. They don't believe that Joe Biden is really on stage. Reality escapes them. Here's the point. If Alan Fung goes down and votes for Kevin McCarthy as Speaker of the House, he is giving the keys to those election deniers, the people that are going to take away all the benefits that we've worked so hard for over many years. they'll do it. And they'll use every strategy. Shut down the government. Don't raise the debt. Don't do this. I've seen it. It'll happen. But the good thing also we have going for us is it's not just a untalented, unsophisticated gentleman running for the Congress. This is one of the most qualified candidates I've ever seen. Intelligence, integrity, a vision. He was our general treasurer, highest returns across the United States through his wise investment. But he went beyond that. He led the effort to rebuild our schools in Rhode Island, in every community. He talked to Seth, we're building a new one in Prata. This is something that he said, I'm going to do. Not because it's part of his strict job, but because it was necessary to help the generation that's here and the future generations go forward. And he brings all of this with great energy and great compassion. He's for us. He's not for the big corporations. He's for us. The folks that grew up on Pontiac Avenue and Cranston around and were lucky enough to have a custodian as a father. Well, thank you. I've now have this greatest privilege to introduce that gentleman I just chatting about. Seth Magazino.
Senator Reed, Cranston's own Jack Reed, who makes us so proud in Washington, fighting for working people. Thank you, Senator. Thank you to Jim Langevin. Now listen, Jim Langevin has served our state with distinction for his entire adult life. Most recently, 22 years in the House of Representatives. He makes us proud every day. He leaves big shoes to fill. Thank you, Jim, for everything. Dr. Biden, who is an inspiration to millions of educators, thank you. Welcome to Rhode Island. And I have to thank and recognize my family who's here. My wife Julia, our son Max, who you heard crying a minute ago, and my parents Ira and Suzanne. Thank you all so much. I wanted to introduce you all to my family because family is what we're all about in Rhode Island. We are a tight-knit state. We are a state where people look out for each other. Family is everything. And my family would not be possible if it were not for programs like Social Security and Medicare, the Affordable Care Act, union rights. My grandfathers were both children of immigrants who grew up poor in the Great Depression. My grandfather Bob was the son of Irish immigrants. He grew up in Worcester, Massachusetts. My grandfather Lewis was the son of Jewish immigrants. He grew up in New York City. Neither of them had any education past high school. They went and they fought in the war. And when they came home, they got jobs that were not glamorous jobs. Bob in Worcester, the Irish one, he got a job as a steel worker at a company that made airplane parts, a company called Wyman Gordon. Lewis in New York was a bookkeeper for a company that canned tomatoes. But here's the point. With those jobs, they were able to buy houses. They were able to put all their kids through school. They were able to build a good middle-class life for themselves and a better life for their kids. That's the way it's supposed to work in this country. If you work hard and you do the right thing, you're supposed to be able to build a good life for yourself and opportunities for your kids. That's the American dream. That's what we're fighting for. But as I talk to Rhode Islanders, what I see, what I hear, is that it's getting harder.
Do you see a speaker?
Working people are putting in the hours, are working hard, but are having a hard time paying their bills. Having a hard time keeping up with the cost of living. They're worried because they see in Washington, D.C. extreme judges and extreme politicians taking away rights that have been on the books for decades. They see politics in Washington has become toxic. And they want to know that their elected representatives are in it for them, not just for their campaign contributors. That's why I'm in this race. I'm in this race to make sure that, like Jim Langevin and like Jack Reed, we have representatives in Washington who are fighting for working people who are trying to make it in this state. What does that mean? That means that we got to fight the big oil companies that have made $150 billion of profits this year, while Rhode Islanders are paying $4 or $5 a gallon for gas. That is wrong. It means we have to have the courage to take on the drug companies that first flooded the streets with opioids and now are making billions of dollars overcharging seniors for their prescriptions. That is not right. It means we have to fight to protect programs like Social Security and Medicare that are the only chance seniors have to keep up with the cost of living. And it means that we have to elect leaders who have the courage to say to those oil companies, to those drug companies, I don't want your campaign money. I'm not in it for you. I'm in it for the people of Rhode Island. The difference in this race could not be bigger. On every single issue that we care about, the difference could not be bigger. You don't hear Alan Fung talking about taking on the oil companies and the drug companies. You don't hear him mention it once. You know why?
He's in their pockets.
Because he's in their pockets. You know who's paying for all of his campaign ads. It's ExxonMobil, it's Chevron. It's all public record. That's who's funding those ads, because they know when he gets to Washington, he is going to be in their pockets and he's going to do a damn thing to lower the cost of oil or lower the cost of gas, because he's in it for them, not for you. He has already said that he opposed the Affordable Care Act and thinks it should be overturned. The Affordable Care Act, which Joe Biden was central in getting passed, by the way. If the Affordable Care Act was repealed, like Alan Fung and his Republican buddies in Washington want to do, if that law was repealed, what would that mean for Rhode Island? 70,000 people in Rhode Island would lose their health insurance on day one. People with pre-existing conditions would be at risk of losing their health care too. What's the point of having health insurance if you might lose it just because you get sick? But that's the way it used to be before the Affordable Care Act, and that's where they want to take us back to. The Inflation Reduction Act, which, as Jack Reed just said, for the first time, Medicare now has the ability to negotiate with the drug companies to lower the cost of prescriptions for seniors. Not a single Republican in Congress voted for that bill, and Alan Fung said he would have been against it too. We had a debate last week. I don't know if you saw it. They asked him about that, and what did he say? He said, well, I was against that bill because it also raised taxes. Well, it only raised taxes on people making more than $400,000 a year. So what he's saying is that tax cuts for billionaires and millionaires is more important to him than lowering drug prices for seniors. That's not what working people in Rhode Island are counting on. So we need leaders in Washington with the courage to stand up to the oil companies, stand up to the drug companies, who will fight to protect our rights, including a woman's right to choose. We need leaders who understand that our democracy is not automatic. We have to fight for our democracy, and that means we have to stand up to the election deniers and the people who try to overturn the results just because their side didn't win. That is not right. That is not America. No. I want my son, I want Max, to grow up in a democracy where his vote will count and where the results will be counted, whether the candidate he voted for won or not. We all remember January 6th. It was a dark day for our country. A violent mob stormed the Capitol and tried to stop the legal counting of votes, your votes. That's the kind of thing you don't see in the United States. That's the kind of thing you see in other places. But the worst part of that day was not what the mob did, and it was not even Donald Trump inciting that mob. The worst part of that day was that after it was all over and the mob had been cleared out, more than 100 Republican members of Congress marched back into that chamber when there was still smoke in the air and the blood of police officers on the floor, and they voted to overturn the election. because they were scared of Donald Trump. They violated their oath to the Constitution because they were scared that Donald Trump might tweet at them otherwise. And Alan Fung thinks that those people should be in charge of Congress. And I'm not talking about all Republicans. I believe in bipartisanship. When we passed that school construction bill in Rhode Island, we did it with bipartisan support, working with Democrats and Republicans. There were more than 60 Republicans who went into the chamber on January 6th, and they did the right thing, and they voted to uphold Joe Biden's election. But Kevin McCarthy, Steve Scalise, who Alan Fung is having a fundraiser with tonight, Jim Jordan, Marjorie Greene, the leadership team of the Republicans in Washington, they all voted to overturn the election. We cannot have election deniers running the House of Representatives heading into the next presidential year. We cannot let it happen, and we will not let it happen. I'm in this fight with all of you for working people, for our democracy, and for our future. And there is no one who I would rather be in this fight with than Dr. Joe Biden. Now, she has led in a number of ways. She has led on healthcare, she has led on climate, she has led on the environment, but first and foremost, she's an educator. A lot of you don't know this about me. I started out my career as a public school teacher. I taught 3rd and 4th grade. I taught in a school district that was low income. We had a school building that was falling apart. At the end of the day, a lot of my kids, 4th graders, 3rd graders, they went home to empty houses because their parents were working 2 or 3 jobs. And we didn't have the resources as teachers that we needed to do the best job that we could. That's why, as state treasurer, my biggest initiative over the last 8 years has been the state school construction program. 5 years ago, school buildings were literally crumbling all across the state of Rhode Island. Schools that were unsafe, that had lead, asbestos. Schools where there was water coming in through the ceilings of the classroom. And we did something about it. Working across the aisle, we put together a once-in-a-generation program to transform school buildings across the state of Rhode Island. It was passed into law by voters, overwhelmingly. And since that happened 4 years ago, we have already invested more than $2 billion repairing or replacing more than 200 school buildings. That's the majority of the public school buildings in Rhode Island, putting more than 20,000 people to work and benefiting more than 100,000 students annually. Right in Cranston, we're building the new Garden City Elementary School. We did Eden Park. Right up the road in Johnson, brand new elementary school has been built, and that impact is going to continue all across the state of Rhode Island. Now, Dr. Biden is an educator. Even now, as First Lady, she's still going into the classroom, still teaching, and she is someone who is an inspiration to teachers, to educators, and to millions of young people all across the state of Rhode Island. So it is our pleasure, it is our honor to welcome and thank Dr. Joe Biden. Thank you for coming to Cranston.
Thank you. I don't know, Jack, you said this was the Italian part of town. I don't see anybody with wine except one woman with white. So Jack, you and Julia have been friends, to me and to Joe for many years, and it's so nice to see you again. And thank you to all the elected leaders who are here with us today to support Seth Magaziner as your next congressman. Thank you, your mom and dad who were here. I had a son who ran for office. It's so much harder when your kids run than your husband, So being here with all of you today, and the smell of the dinner, although you must have eaten, I see one meatball there, okay? It brings back so many of my childhood memories, especially staying over at my Italian grandparents' house in New Jersey, South Jersey, every weekend of my childhood. And every morning, my 4 sisters and I would wake up to the smell of warm Italian bread toast. You know that smell, right? Yeah, my grandpa would have the toaster right there on the linoleum table. The wire would be hanging and plugged into the wall. And I loved watching my grandma hang ribbons of homemade pasta, her apron over her brown linen dress, hands covered in flour, and the whole house smelled like, you know, the scent of basil and tomatoes, and you know, from her, yes, from her garden, and you know, the days that she made sauce.
I think the best mom.
So, my grandparents helped teach me the values that they, you know, that I try to live up after all these years later. Kindness, generosity, family loyalty, passion, and embracing joy. And they're the same values that Seth and his family, Julia and little Max, represent here in Rhode Island. And growing up, there were a lot of things that shaped my life. You know, our family history, my father's naval service in World War II, cheering on the Phillies every summer, which I'm still fighting, you know, for the Phillies. Wait a minute, do we not have a Phillies fan here in the house?
Those two guys right there, I can't
That's
see
good. What wasn't a big part of my life then was politics. Now, I know that my parents voted, okay, Republican, but they didn't talk about it at dinner. You know, instead they talked about my dad's job at the bank. They talked about my grandparents' health and the dreams that they had for the education of their 5 daughters. And I bet a lot of your families are the same. So when I met Joe, I felt, you know, out of touch from his world in DC. And on our first date, I remember thinking, thank God I voted for him. But for most Americans, things aren't that much different today. Most parents don't come home from work to debate the ins and outs of Senate bills. But they know that the things that, you know, that affect them and the things that they want, like all of you want. You know, schools, job, affordable health care, safe neighborhoods, Republicans and Democrats and everyone in between. You know, I've traveled more than 40 states as your First Lady, and there have been times when I've been met with anger and hurt, but I've also seen how a kind word or gesture can relax someone's shoulders just a little bit. Open their hearts to what you have to say, even when you know that we'll never agree. And I've seen how, despite our differences, Americans across this country really do want the same things. The chance to work hard and build a better life for your families. So when extremists attack the rights of the vast majority of Americans, like a woman's right to choose, or when they stand in the way of affordable prescriptions or clean energy, they are letting down all Americans. Right now, there are politicians out there who treat government like a sport, and it sounds like there's a couple here in Rhode Island. But governing isn't a game. There's no us versus them. No teams to root for or against. You know, we're just people. Americans from all walks of life who deserve hope. Seth understands that. He knows that Rhode Islanders depend on their Social Security and their Medicare. That you need to be able to afford your prescriptions. And that's exactly what he's going to fight for in Congress. He will stand up for the right to choose. And he's going to hold big corporations accountable when they put profits over people. You elected my husband Joe, and I thank you for that. And he knows how to get things done. He's delivered results again and Jack has said, he did it with a slim majority in Congress. Just imagine what he could do with more partners like Seth. Across the country can make their own pregnancy decisions.
Yes.
We protect Social Security and Medicare, our right to vote, and marriage equality. It's up to all of us to make it happen. Early voting has already begun, so make sure you vote. Talk to your friends and help them make a plan to get ready to vote as well. These fights feel enormous, and they are. But it comes down to those small moments. One ballot cast, one phone call to a neighbor who may have forgotten to vote, one ride offered to the polling place. Again and again, these actions just add up like drops in a tidal wave. And suddenly, we see what can be done. One vote can swing a precinct. One precinct can decide a district. One district can win a state. It starts with you. It starts with all of us digging a little deeper, working a little harder, and believing that together, all of us, all of you, together, Seth Magazine is going to win.
You still have a mic at the front, right?
Friday.
Yeah.
Friday on Wednesday. Okay.